This is the Storypunks podcast, the show where we talk about all the punks. So steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. I'm your host, Cindy Grigg. This is episode 27, and today we are talking about Solarpunk, Ecopunk, hopepunk, and yes, by the way, that's a thing, hopepunk. So we're talking about some different environmentally focused punks you may not have heard of. That's definitely how it's been for me. And I'm so thrilled to have one of the best curators I've found in these areas, and her work is so important. So Mary Woodbury will be talking to us in a two-part sequence. So in part one, so this episode, we'll be talking about her definitions of these different environmentally focused punks and her insight based on curating so much information, so many works, and it's just an absolute delight. She'll be sharing tons of resources with us across both episodes, and in the next episode, she will also share some really cool initiatives that you can get involved in that help the environment and leave, a smaller footprint when it comes to books and publishing and all these things that we love. So it's a really cool and dynamic discussion, has so much breadth to it, which I always really appreciate, and I'm so excited to share that with you. So it seems appropriate for my personal update to share with you something that is very nature related and very timely, because this morning I went on a drive, I rolled down my windows, and I am just a nut for fresh air. I sleep on my porch quite a bit. I just love being outside. And so I always defer to rolling down the windows as opposed to blasting the AC when possible. And so I'd rolled down my windows and I was like, oh my goodness, it's here. Autumn. I live for the autumn. So it was the first day when I felt a really convincing bite in the air. And for some reason, the air in that particular area smelled like the fair. It smelled like cotton candy, lots of fried stuff. I don't know what was going on, but it just completely washed over me, and I was so excited. And then guess what? My mind started percolating because, it's interesting to think about when your most productive time of year is. Sometimes we think about when's my most productive time of the day, and we really focus on the day, which makes sense. That's the more accessible unit of time. But I even forget how much better I produce in the autumn. And I was just hit with that. So my mind was percolating with that. And I thought back to something I actually tried to do last year. And so this is where all my gushing about autumn ties in with my personal update of what I've been doing. So last year I decided, you know what? I would really like to illustrate how amazing dictation is. So speaking my writing, and how much it can help people produce. And by the way, I would like to get through a whole bunch of word count on this super saga I'm writing. And I call it that because my work, Peacock Levine and the Ethereal Fates of Not, it is literally about Norse mythology, and it's 30 plus books. So it has a massive word count, no matter how you slice it. And I've been plugging away on this. I have several of the books written, but I definitely don't have 30 books written. And it's something where I've tried to cut it down. Oh, maybe there don't need to be that many books, but there totally does. It's something that I've heard Brandon Sanderson say that I absolutely love. And he just says, err on the side of being awesome. Err on the side of what's awesome, some version of that. And what's awesome for this story is for it to be a super saga. So in that light, since I can't negotiate on the awesomeness, I have to negotiate on my way to getting to the awesomeness, because I literally can't take, I'm saying literally a lot today. I can't take the next 10 years to write this book series. I just don't want to. I want to get it done. And so that's where dictation can be such a cool lever. It's crazy, but I am going to dictate 1 million words in the next 4 months. So I'm calling it the Autumn of Dictation. No, I'm not. I'm calling it the Autumn of 1 million words. So it may sound completely impossible. Anyone who's entrenched in writing and does a daily word count, a lot of times it comes in closer to like 1,000 words a day and maybe less and, maybe a little more, but not something that would build to be, 1 million words in 4 months. And so this can sound really crazy. And then guess what? I'm not doing this full time. I work. And so, I thought about all these things and how that can sound to people, but it really is possible because with dictation, you're writing more word count, you speak faster than you write, and you can sustain it because you're not doing this, like you're not killing your wrists. There's not the physical limitations. At least they're higher. There's more margin there. And so that's why this is a possibility. And so last year I was going to do this, and then some different business stuff came up and some things that just aren't on my plate this year. And so this year I think is going to be the year that I can actually pull it off. And I had a really good start last year, so I know exactly how to attack it and how to jump in with it and how to just luxuriate in it, to be honest. Because again, I love being out in the autumn, and I've had a recent leg surgery, so I won't probably be able to do it walking for that whole time, which is what I love to do. I love to dictate while I'm walking, and I come back and I have so many words and so many benefits to my health. But that may be more limited this year, but I'm still gonna sit outside in the autumn leaves, and I'm going to feel that amazing cool air and just be in love with this story. So there's something also to being able to draft the entire thing. I have it all outlined, and I'm so excited to just get it on paper, but I think it's going to come out better if I do it in one big push. So that's going to be my focus. I'm so excited about it. And you can follow along if you would like to see how a dictation lifestyle works. If you've been thinking about it and you want to see the benefits, and you really can have these amazing results for things you're working on. And so, yes, I also am offering those dictation courses. So it's not like you have to, watch my Autumn of Dictation and then I'll be sharing stuff through that. And that's it's not really a learning tool. It's just more of a vlog type thing if you're familiar with, YouTube and stuff. So that's just me showing myself in the trenches doing it. But then you can actually jump in with my courses right away. So if you would like to start learning how to understand the benefits and keep that vision so that you can get through selecting all the gear. And I know it shouldn't be such a thing, but trust me, it's a thing to try to sort all that out and get your strategy for it, because there's so many different ways and it all comes down to like choosing tools, and it can be very overwhelming. But my course takes you through that. And then if you do choose Dragon, which is honestly the best powerhouse of dictation software, then you also need to know how to get through that, how to train your voice on their system, how to have your personalized vocabulary, how to maintain it, which is one of the biggest problems people fall into. So all this stuff, you can find that in my courses. And the way you can get connected with any of this, if it's interesting to you, is to go to theproductiveauthor.com and thedictationcoach.com. I hope you'll check it out, or check Autumn out, We're definitely celebrating autumn, and especially with this upcoming discussion. So without further ado, let's jump into this episode, because we're talking about future-focused technologies, in my opinion. Yes, you can write Ecopunk and Solarpunk about the past. I think there should be more of that. But it's really a future-focused realm most of the time. And we're talking about, how we decide what our lives are going to be like and what our world is going to be like. So that is so exciting. And again, I'm so excited to jump into part 1. This will begin with Mary's bio, but I guess it's technically an autobiography, because this is in Mary's own words. From the time I could read, I was engrossed in fiction, but the stories that were close to nature were my favorites. Later, I double majored in English and cultural anthropology at Purdue University, graduating in the mid-1990s. There I extended my studies in environmental prose and literature and in world mythology. In the late 1990s, I had a project on the web covering the nature writings of Beat and SF Renaissance authors. In the early 2000s, I became the chief editor at Jack Magazine, now archived at Stanford University, which provided an arc from mid-century to modern-day literature. During the 10 years of the project, co-funded by Michael Rothenberg, we republished poetry, prose, and art by Gregory Corso, Michael McClure, Peter Coyote, Angus MacLeese, Ira Cohen, and others. We looked at the nature writings and teachings of people like Jack Collum, Philip Whalen, and Joanne Snyder. In 2010, I began Moon Willow Press, which originally published debut novels and prose chapbooks by some of Jack's authors. The very small niche press currently focuses on environmental writings and donates a portion of sales to plant trees in economically and ecologically depressed areas, with over 1,130 trees planted. So awesome. The press does not allow for waste and uses only fiber that is recycled or that comes from sustainably managed forests. In 2008, when I began writing my novel, Back to the Garden, it was after a period of a decade or so when I was wondering how climate change could be explored in fiction. And I know so many of our listeners are interested in doing much of what Mary is talking about there. So to continue, and I began researching novels that seemed to focus on it somehow. Later, I discovered Jim Dwyer's Where the Wild Books Are, a field guide to ecofiction from the University of Nevada Press, 2010. The guide recognized the concept of climate change within fiction and described such stories as cautionary or disaster fiction. Began this website in August 2013, referring to eco-fiction.com. Surely one of my last big literary projects in life outside of publishing and writing. I am excited by the evolution of ecofiction, by how authors and other artists are dealing with it in our modern era. So welcome onto the show, Mary. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
In this show, we discuss the punks, and you refer to your writing as ecofiction, which, Solarpunk, Ecopunk, and hopepunk can be part of. So how do you define your favorite among these terms, if you have one, or maybe even each of these terms?
Until you sent me the questions, I had never actually heard of hopepunk, but I think it sounds hopeful. So I don't know a lot about it. I have heard of Solarpunk and Ecopunk, and actually talked with Kat Sparks, who edited a volume of anthology called Ecopunk, Speculative Tales of Radical Futures. And that interview is also at my site. And I asked her a similar question. I said, what's the difference between Ecopunk and Solarpunk? And her answer was that generally Ecopunk is just kind of a broader category, and Solarpunk might be within that, and that Solarpunk is, I think they're all tied to cleaner technologies, but I think that Solarpunk is getting really well explained and described and fleshed out in both like kind of a subculture, but also I've seen articles in the news recently about it. And I guess if I had to pick a favorite, that would be it. It's just it's kind of like bright, but punk. So it's sun, renewable, and then resistance. And I really like that idea.
I do as well. And I'll admit that hope punk was pretty new to me too. But I've been hearing it more and more. And I think it's also interesting that it crosses over with some of these other terms like ecofiction.
There's actually quite a few, if you think of like modern era genres, literary genres, there's a lot that have eco something, climate something, green something, solar something. And so all of these are happening now. The first feature I did was on that novel that I don't know if I even mentioned it earlier it's not a novel, sorry. It's an anthology by World Weaver Press coming out this August, but it's a translated to English from a Portuguese Brazilian anthology that was published in 2012. So that was my first global ecofiction special, and I talked to Fabio Fernandes, who was a translator, and it's interesting because he also translated novels like A Clockwork Orange, Neuromancer, and Snow Crash from English to Portuguese, and now he's translating this anthology over to English so that we can read it. I actually have it and I'm reading it, but I was asking him how, what had you heard of Solarpunk before? And he said back in the 70s, he knew that some authors and scientists were trying to get like a green punk movement going. I don't know if it ever, took off, but all of these prefixes, climate, eco, green, solar, like I mentioned before, you'll hear a lot of them. And then on the other side is fiction or punk or something. And another one is Anthropocene fiction.
Cassette tape record.
Yeah. And I think that would cover just about, everything in the modern era, everything, like anything environmental, and then literary and environmental now. So
tapes. And I just remember dictating stuff I wanted to write into that recorder, and then I would go home and type it. So
yeah.
The good news is we're not there. Like, there are definitely better ways to go about this now, but we're also not there. Like, and I'm pointing to the future because there's so much more that could come and to make things easier. As it stands, it's so difficult to get the gear right. And it shouldn't be. I know that shouldn't be a thing, but it totally is. And so my course.
Okay, sure. I think, I want to talk about why I decided to name my site Ecofiction instead of anything else. And because it is environmental fiction at its broadest category. And the term ecofiction was actually studied by scholars from the 1970s onward. And what I like best about it is that according to their definitions and explanations, ecofiction covers, it's so inclusive of all this other types of environmental fiction, and it covers human impact on the environment, and it also covers non-human environmental fiction. So that seemed to be the most inclusive as possible as I could get. So that's why I chose it as a domain name. But the term goes back to the 1970s. And you mentioned Jim Dwyer earlier. He wrote Where the Wild Books Are, a field guide to ecofiction. And he had studied hundreds of environmental books. And it's a really good book. It was published in 2010. I'm not even sure if it's still in print, but you can definitely buy a used copy of it from Amazon. And just a little side note that I always thought is really interesting. In the 70s, there was this anthology called Ecofiction by John Stadler. He's the editor. And it was mostly early environmental stories, mostly science fiction from the 1930s and on up to through the 60s. And it had writers like Ray Bradbury, Kurt Vonnegut Jr., John Steinbeck, Edgar Allan Poe. I have these written down. So Sarah Orne Jewett, Frank Herbert, J.G. Ballard, Isaac Asimov, Daphne du Maurier. And so there's, when I found that out, it was after I had started the site that I came across that anthology. And I thought, wow. So environmental fiction's been around for a while. It's kind of paralleled the environmental movement in the 1970s, along with the work of natural history combined with the humanities. I think that overall, environmental fiction relies heavily on the natural environment as part of the story. It does more than give just lip service to ecological concerns. And one of the things I like best about it is that it can occur in really any genre. Like, I don't think of environmental fiction or ecofiction as a genre by itself. I think it's just a subject of literature that really relies heavily on the natural world for the story, and it can take place in any genre. And it can also take place across time and space. I mean, past, present, future. It could take place on this planet, on an imaginary planet, something in outer space, as within science fiction, or a place like Middle Earth, like with, Tolkien. So it's really a broad category, but it's interesting and it's evolving because of all the modern concerns about climate change. And so overall, it's just a very broad category of fiction.
It is. And it's really interesting to think about how someone might come to this as a focus area. So I'm really interested to know, is there a specific memory or is there a specific point where you made that decision that this would be your life's work?
I think it really just goes back to my childhood. I was a big reader. I was also a big lover of the outdoors. And, I grew up as a kid. This was like before cell phones, before personal computers were everywhere. So the only screen we had was our television. And my parents were very strict about how much we watched. So they were pushing us to get outside. And they also really pushed us to read. And so they had, I had all kinds of books, but they also subscribed to National Geographic and Time Life books that really covered the great outdoors. So that interest was just there from early on. And eventually I just combined these two interests. And, I can't even remember when exactly I did that. It's just was like an evolution of this concept. I think early on, I read a lot of fairy tales and fables. Those were some of my first readings, and they involve the natural elements and natural landscapes and animals. And so from then on, I just looked for this in literature. It was some of my favorite literature.
I'm really glad you brought out that link. That's how I began reading as well, those
really?
types of works. And you're right, the natural world is very present.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, what would you say to the person listening today who feels, I guess I shouldn't say uninspired, but maybe they're just not into environmental issues? Are there any key perspective points that have stood out to you over the years as you've worked in this area that might bring someone in or ring a note with them?
I actually sat on a panel called Climate Change and Storytelling a couple years ago on Earth Day. It was hosted by the West Vancouver Public Library. And I sat on there with Claudia Casper, another author, and then a woman who was asking us questions. And the audience was really curious about that because some of them weren't sure they would be interested in reading environmental fiction. And I think we got kind of a gist of two different types. Some just didn't really care that. I mean, even if they cared, they didn't care to read about it in a story because they just, don't want to be reminded or they weren't interested in reading about environmental stuff in fiction. And the other side said that the world news today is so depressing that they just couldn't really, imagine themselves reading some novel that might be dystopian and super depressing. So our answer to that is that, we thought about it on the panel and just came to the conclusion that really it's up to the authors to make stories good. And even if we're writing about, valid concerns that we have about climate change, about, fracking, about the plastics in the ocean, these are very valid concerns that we're really motivated to write about because we want to get to people's hearts. And there has to be a good story there to begin with. And I will read you a quote later that I thought of when I was looking at your questions, but the story is the most important thing. It has to be something that reaches the reader's heart. And the second part of that is not to be preachy or didactic in the story. And I think it's hard to do. We're all guilty of it. I mean, in my story, Back to the Garden, I needed to find a way to maybe you want to give the reader information about what's going on with the world, so I did that. But sometimes I thought maybe this is just being a little bit too heading in their face that the world is terrible. We are, in certain areas. Now, I have an example of a good story that's set in a really kind of depressing world, and that is Jeff Vandermeer's Born. Not sure if it would be considered a solarpunk story, but it's very much in a future world where biotech has taken over, and there's nothing not depressing about the world. There's a big bear flying around scaring everyone. There's a witch that's trying to take over. And the story kind of concentrates on one couple, and their life isn't that bright. They live in an ugly place, and they have to scavenge to get by, and they have to eat bugs to get by. But the woman, Rachel, finds this little creature. It's a biotech creature, and it's called Born. So, I know Jeff, I've talked with him before, and I know that he's writing from a place where he's concerned about the environment, but he doesn't come out and actually say that in the story. What he did was create this futuristic world that would make us think. And then he created this story about Rachel and this little Born creature that was really a story about a mother and child. And it was funny and it was heartwarming. And that's the kind of stories that people who are uninspired would totally get into. And I think that's just one example.
Oh, thank you for the example. That really helps illustrate it. And I completely agree with you. So, speaking of writing and creating stories, you're writing novels under the name Clara Hume. And so you'll have a version of Back to the Garden released later this year. It's become part of a bigger series, and that's called the Wild Mountain series. Mm-hmm. Would you consider this Ecopunk or Solarpunk? I'm thinking no, because of what you said earlier. But could you tell us more about the story either way? Because I still think it's relevant.
Yeah, there is some solar energy in the first novel, but it's not strongly relying on tech. It's almost just the opposite. It's when I was reading your questions, I thought about this quote that Octavia Butler said one time. She had been, and it's actually from Robert Heinlein, but she said that science fiction stories have that 3 what if categories: the what if, the if only, and if this goes on category. And so my story was definitely of the latter, and that's kind of what Octavia Butler was getting into, because she really recognized, that environmentally our world was going downhill. My novel is definitely a speculative novel. And it's one of those, if things keep going like this, what if, this happens? And so I think when we're writing stories that are speculative, that are set in the future, we're going through one of those 3 whats. And mine is, okay, maybe this could happen if we went off on this path. And on the path that I chose, it was really a path that we don't want to see, because there was a lot of death in the world. And I think that a lot of times, if we're thinking about climate change and some of the worst things that can happen, we think about disease that can't be controlled. We think about, the inability to live with the current kind of population and technology that we have to keep up to have that kind of, stuff for everybody involved. And so mine is kind of more of a get back to nature novel. The characters live on a mountain, and they do go on a journey in the first novel to go find one of their relatives and bring her back home. But it's more on the lines of they don't really know what's going on with the world altogether, because everything's, as far as they know, is off grid, and they're just journaling their experience, and the journal is what makes the novel. But it's more Arcadian than technology based, but there is some technology in it. As far as modern technology, technology is any kind of tools that anybody would use. So they do, they have some solar backup. They have a generator that they never use. Their gardens are permaculture. And I'm not sure if that's related to Solarpunk, but it might be, because it's kind of a good use of energy and kind of reusing energy and gardening. So, and then the second part of the book will go into their home is actually getting too warm to live in. There's too many wildfires. So they're going to be moved north up to Canada, where I live. So.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds so fascinating. Thank you. And it is interesting to think about what constitutes technology, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are punks that don't deal with outright technology as we tend to think of it, like manner punk, where the manners are considered the technology. So I think it's really interesting to think of ecopunk or, ecofiction in terms of some of these other genres as well, and kind of compare and contrast. It's really interesting.
Sure. People want to find some of the major themes occurring in environmental literature. My site actually has a really big database, and you can look and search by genre. So if you want to find Solarpunk, you can search by that. And if you want to find Ecopunk, you can search that way. If you want to find magical realism. So there's a lot of different works there. And if you're interested in a certain subject and kind of want to study the themes within it, you can use the database.
And I will continue with the second half of this conversation in 2 weeks.